Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here for the final session of VS Code Day 2023. My name is Joyce and I'm a software engineer on the VS Code team here at Microsoft. Today we're going to be getting a tour of everything that you can do with GitHub in VS Code for the web. And if you're not familiar with VS Code for the web, don't worry, I'm about to explain all of that to you. And whether you're just getting started with GitHub and VS Code, or you're an experienced developer who uses the stuff every single day, there's something in this talk for you. So stay tuned and follow along. So first of all, GitHub lets you back up, collaborate, and version on your code. And so, for example, you can edit GitHub pull requests and repositories already on github.com. Today, what I'm going to show you is a way for you to do all of that with the interface that you know and love inside VS Code entirely in your browser. It runs anywhere, no installs required. You get to customize VS Code exactly the way you want it. And if you ever run into limitations of this lightweight, free and unlimited workspace, you can always upgrade easily to a GitHub codespace or a local clone. So today's tour is going to be pretty long. We're going to cover a lot of content, and so I hope you stay with me. We're going to show how you can open repositories in VS Code from github.com without cloning them locally or anywhere, even on a virtual machine. We're going to show how you can work on multiple branches in the same repository simultaneously, how you can create, edit, and review pull requests directly in your browser with VS Code, how you can edit website content, resolve merge conflicts, and so many other features besides. So let's get started. Here, I'm in my browser. I'm on the Microsoft VS Code repo. The VS Code team ships everything that we do from GitHub. We work on GitHub every single day. And so I've just got my favorite repo in the world pulled up in github.com. But if you have some other repo that you want to follow along with, please feel free to open that in your browser. And I'm going to show you GitHub's best kept secret, which is when you hit dot, this opens your repo in VS Code directly in your browser. So let's go do that. 3, 2, 1, dot. And you'll see here that I get a message saying that GitHub is setting up my web editor. And this is my repository opened up in my browser. As you can see on the right here, I do have my file system available. When I click through a particular folder, I can open files, and that doesn't trigger a page reload. And you'll also notice that unlike github.com, this experience is not read-only. So for example, I can double-click into the README file to put it into edit mode. And from here, I can actually just start making edits. So I'm going to say, hi from VS Code Day 2023. And when I hit save, you see that there is a modified indicator in the title of this tab. And that tells me that VS Code knows I'm editing a GitHub repository. There's been some content that's currently published to the remote. And there's some changes that are local that I can then go into the source control view on the right and push back to GitHub. I'm not going to do that just yet because I want to show you some other ways of being able to do this. One other thing to note about this experience is that my key bindings and settings and extensions, for the most part, do work. So for example, here I'm going to use one of my favorite shortcuts, which is Control-Shift-K, to delete a line. I do love deleting lines. And in addition, you notice now that there's no more changes in this file. And so I actually get this really nice code lens here. And this is coming from the Git lens extension, which you can install from the extension marketplace or by searching in the extensions vlet directly in VS Code. And that's also the extension that's contributing these amazing inline blames so that whenever I'm looking at a repository for the first time, I know exactly who changed which lines and when. That's just one of my favorite things about this experience right off the bat. Any repository that I want to explore for the first time, I no longer need to clone that to my local machine and get that opened up in VS Code. And again, because this all runs in my browser, it also means that I can do this on a mobile device or a tablet. If you're working on a device and you want to follow along, but you don't have an external keyboard attached, you can also replace the .com part of any github.com repository URL with .dev, and that takes you to the exact same experience. So right off the bat, what we've just seen, open repositories from anywhere in VS Code directly from github.com. It's completely built in right there at your fingertips. The next thing that I want to show you is that for anyone in the audience who works with Azure repos, this also works in Azure repos. So here I have a repository that is hosted on Azure DevOps. And again, I'm going to hit the dot key, 3, 2, 1, dot. And that takes me to a slightly different URL. This is vscode.dev. So just like github.dev was VS Code built into github.com, vscode.dev is a generalized instance of github.dev that supports not just editing repos from GitHub, but also repositories from Azure repos, and many, many other experiences besides. If you missed any of the talks earlier on remote development, for example, I highly recommend that you go check that out. And so far, I've only really talked about editing repositories, but you can also edit pull requests, and that's one of the scenarios we're going to get into very, very shortly. So next up, what I'm going to show you is some of the ways that GitHub and VS Code for the web gives you superpowers. The first thing that I love about this experience is that it gives me unlimited checkouts for the same repo. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're debugging something locally and you want to know how it's changed over time? Like maybe you introduced a regression somewhere or someone else has made a change that you didn't know about, and you need to track how a given feature set has changed over time. How do you normally do that? There's a few ways. If you have the timeline view on VS Code Desktop, for example, you can compare changes for the same file across multiple different versions. But what I'm about to show you is that you can also check out lightweight instances of the same repository alongside your VS Code Desktop instance. So here, for example, I'm going to open my desktop instance of VS Code because I always have that running. And here I'm just on the main branch. And let's say I want to know how this file has changed between releases. Here, I can go back into my browser. And here, as you can see in the bottom left corner in the status bar, I am on the release 1.76 branch. This is the branch corresponding to the contents of the release that went out 2 months ago. And so I can just switch between the same repository. This is 1.77, and all of these are able to coexist in my browser simultaneously, so I can make those comparisons really quickly and easily. And usually I have more than one monitor. Today I'm kind of dealing with a limited setup here, but I'll have VS Code on one of my monitors and then vscode.dev open in my browser on a different window, and that allows me to make those quick visual comparisons. One thing that might not be obvious to you is that every single branch in VS Code for the web with GitHub is an isolated workspace. This means that if I make a change in 1.76 over here, just locally, and then I switch over here to this tab, you'll see that those changes are not reflected there. And what this allows me to do is work on multiple pull requests in isolation. Pull requests, if you're unfamiliar, are great ways for you to collaborate with your coworkers on code. And so, for example, here, this is our endgame week for our release. We're going to be publishing 1.78 next week, which I'm really excited about. And so we're actually in the process of fixing a couple of smaller issues. So here in VS Code Desktop, I have a whole bunch of other changes. And then I happened to open this file and notice that I had some additional changes that I wanted to check in. And I don't want to stash all of my changes locally. So what I can do is switch over to my browser, open the same repository there, and then just go ahead and commit and push those changes. If you're wondering how to get to vscode.dev in your browser when you already have VS Code Desktop open, let me show you. Here you go into the bottom left corner of VS Code. This is the remote indicator. And if I click on this, it gives me a list of actions that I can use to connect to various remotes where VS Code runs. And so you can go ahead and click on Continue Working in vscode.dev, and that's going to open the exact same GitHub repository that you have in your local instance, but in your browser. So in this case, I already have that repository open, so I'm not going to use that. But just so you know, that's a really easy way for you to go between VS Code Desktop and VS Code for the web, and that works in reverse as well. So here, I have a change that's prepared, and I'd like to go ahead and commit that. But you'll see in the bottom left corner here that there's a little lock icon, and that indicates that the main branch is protected. on the VS Code repo, we do not allow you to directly commit to main. Instead, all changes have to go through pull request so that they can be reviewed by a team member and determined to be appropriate to ship. So what's going to happen when I click this commit and push button is that VS Code for the web is going to detect that I'm trying to commit to a protected branch, and it's going to prompt me to create a new branch on demand. So here, I'll click commit and push. And you'll see here that I have a pre-populated branch name. This is actually randomly generated based on my settings. So the prefix here is dev/joycerhl, which is my GitHub handle. And then this part over here is just randomly generated from a bunch of dictionaries that we have built into the product. And if I go ahead and click enter over here, what it's going to do is create that branch, commit my changes to that branch, and then switch me over to that branch so I can create a pull request back into the main branch. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here. And now I'm getting switched over to that newly created branch, dev/joycerhl/semantic marmot. I learn all kinds of interesting words from this feature. And once I'm all loaded up here, you'll see that I'm now on the branch that I just created. And then I can go into the command palette, Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P, and say create pull request. So this command right here comes from the GitHub pull request extension. If you watched Sandeep's talk earlier today, you'll know that it is also available on VS Code Desktop. And as you can see right now, it is also supported in VS Code for the web. So when you're on a branch, you can create a pull request. And here I can specify which branch I want to merge that pull request into. The title of the pull request is pre-populated from the commit message that I had going on earlier. And I can configure whether I want this branch to be auto-merged, which for the most part, I love this setting because it just means that anytime I make a pull request, I don't have to go back and actually click merge once someone has fully reviewed it. So I'm going to click auto-merge here, and I'm going to open that pull request. It creates that pull request for me. And then I get a description of my pull request, the title. Well, I didn't leave a description here, actually. And then we have automation on the VS Code team that's going to automatically post that this pull request has been created. But if I wanted to, I could request a review from someone specific. For example, I could request a review from Connor, who presented earlier today and who actually happens to own some of these, the code that I'm modifying here. And if I wanted to be really helpful, I could also copy a VS Code dev link. And what this will do is copy a link to this pull request that once pasted into your browser is going to take whoever opens that link directly back into this pull request environment. And from here on, suppose I'm now actually in reviewer mode, I can go back into that file that was changed, and I can see a diff of what actually changed. And unlike the diff on github.com, this actually gives me the full editor context. And I can even configure the way that I want this diff to show up. So for example, in this editor title context menu here, there's an action that allows me to switch to an inline view. And that just, if I'm in a space-constrained space like I am right now with just one monitor, being able to view this diff inline is clutch. So that is one of the scenarios that I wanted to show. And of course, this also works if you are trying to update one of your pull requests. So let's say you've created a pull request and you close out that tab, you go back to VS Code Desktop, and then sometime later, your coworker actually gets around to reviewing your pull request, and they say, you need to make some changes, like maybe you left a console.log statement in there or like a to-do. We've all been there. And what you can do now to quickly update those pull requests without blowing away your local checkout is right-click on any pull requests that you've been working on and say, check out pull request on vscode.dev. This view, again, comes from the GitHub pull requests extension. If you have that installed in desktop, then you have easy access back to those pull requests on github.com anytime directly from in your editor. So for example, here, I'm going to click check out pull request on vscode.dev, and that is going to go ahead and open that pull request back up in vscode.dev for me. And once that pull request is done loading, you'll see, again, I have all of my pull request context, and anyone who's looking at this, including myself, we can make changes directly to that pull request and commit them back to github.com using the commit view if we want to. You can also leave comments directly inside of VS Code. So here, you'll see that I have this comments widget, and I can click on the editor gutter to start making some comments, and I can even make a suggestion, which will then get published back to GitHub, I should say, as a committable suggestion that the author of the PR can choose to accept if they want to or not. So that is the pull requests functionality. And one additional thing that I wanted to show is, suppose you're reviewing a pull request from someone else on your team. So here, for example, this pull request was created by my teammate Alex. She actually maintains the GitHub pull requests extension. And suppose I wanted to actually start a collaboration session because I need some additional context about what this change is doing before I can review it effectively. With the live share extension, which you can also install again from the extensions view-lit, you can just click share. And what that is going to do is start a collaboration session directly inside your editor and copy an invitation linked to your clipboard. And then if I go into my browser search bar and hit paste, you can see here that this is a vscode.dev/liveshare link. And anyone who clicks on this link is going to be able to just join me in my editor and pair program with me live and follow me around in the editor and see everything that I'm doing. So that is pull requests. One other scenario that I'd like to show today is you can use GitHub in VS Code for the web to update website content. So here, for example, if you attended the talk by Eric and Kai earlier today, then you'll know that we are currently in Endgame and we're about to release, and every single VS Code engineer participates in the process of writing documentation and release notes. So I'd actually like for you to come along with me today because I need to be writing my release notes this week anyway. And so I'm putting together my release notes here. You can see that I have some text updates here as well as image references. You'll also see that I have 33 incoming changes on this branch. And this is because everyone on the team is committing directly to the vNext branch on the VS Code docs repo. And then at the end of our release process, we merge that branch back into main, and that gets published as code.visualstudio.com. So there might be some merge conflicts. I'm going to click the sync button, and we'll see what happens. So here I will click sync. It says that there's going to be conflicts. Cool. Continue. And I actually got lucky that time. There were no merge conflicts. So all of my working changes were able to be applied on top of all of the changes that come in from the remote without any issues. So unfortunately, you don't get to see merge conflict support here today, but rest assured that it is possible to resolve merge conflicts in the event that they do arise. And we do also try to minimize the need for you to deal with those merge conflicts as much as possible. One additional thing I'd like to call out here that is not yet unstable, but will be next week, is we've recently added support for Git large file storage directly in VS Code for the web with GitHub. What do I mean by Git LFS? If you've ever tried to check a large file into Git, and if you make a lot of changes to those files over time, you'll notice that cloning that repo gets slower and slower. And the reason for that is because every time you make a change to that file, the entire working copy of that file gets stored in your Git history. So everyone who clones it is going to have to download every single version of that file that's changed over time. To fix that, we've enabled Git LFS for the VS Code docs repo. And this is also a great thing to enable if you happen to be working on a website that has lots of image content or videos or anything of that sort. And with the release that's going to be happening next week, I'm really excited to say that we will have Git LFS support built directly into GitHub with VS Code for the web. So here I have a PNG file, it's a screenshot, and if I control-click into this path here, it'll just open that file directly. And you see here that I am actually in an image editor. This image editor is contributed by the Luna Paint extension, which is maintained by my teammate Daniel. And so I have that screenshot going. I've got the link to it in my text. And I'm going to click commit and push directly from the source control view here. And that is just going to upload my changes directly to GitHub. And then here, if I go into this image file and say copy GitHub head link, I can head over here to GitHub. And you can see that there's this nice badge here that tells me this file was stored with Git LFS. So Git LFS is just a really efficient way for you to store large image files that are going to be changing constantly over time. Of course, the fact that I can edit just regular website content also means that I can edit markdown repositories. So here, for example, I have a personal GitHub repo. This is the repo that I use to take all of my notes, my meeting prep and everything like that. You'll see here that I have an Excalidraw diagram. This is courtesy of the Excalidraw extension, which you can install in VS Code for the web. And here I just have an architecture diagram that describes how we're able to provide this experience directly inside your browser where Git and VS Code don't otherwise run. Also, this is my script back here. I did prepare my entire VS Code day talk directly in my browser. All right, so if you're looking at all of this and you're thinking, I really want to try this out, I want to incorporate this into my daily workflow, I have a couple of fun companion extensions for you. The first one is the Chrome and Edge browser extension that we ship. You'll see this nice VS Code icon in my browser right here, and that just indicates that this extension's been installed. And what this does is it allows me to go into my browser search bar, and just like I would do in my terminal when I type code dot or code folder name, I can go here and say code VS Code docs, and that is going to allow me to hit enter and then open that repository directly in vscode.dev. So anytime I want to open a repo in vscode.dev, I can just do that directly from my browser search bar. And if you're looking at all of this and you're thinking, it's cool that I can browse repositories and pull requests without cloning them locally, but I don't want to use the browser. I want to stay in VS Code on desktop. You can do that too. All of these experiences that I've been showing you also work on desktop with the extensions that are built in on VS Code for the web. So the GitHub repositories extension is the primary extension that provides all of these source control integration that you've seen. It's essentially a lightweight Git client. It also provides the file system. It provides text and file search, so you can do Control-Shift-F and do a full text search and get high fidelity results. And then here I've also got the Azure Repos extension, and this is what provides the equivalent experience for Azure DevOps. All right, so all I've talked about so far is all the things that you can do in this environment, but I do want to call out that there are some really important limitations. One of the biggest limitations is that there is currently no terminal in the browser. And so, for example, if I go over here and try to open a terminal, I did that with the Control backtick hotkey. You'll see here that there is a welcome view in the terminal that says that you can create a terminal by going to GitHub codespaces, and here we even provide you with a one-click experience that's going to recreate the repository that you're currently looking at, but in a GitHub codespace. And any of your uncommitted changes that you had running locally in this workspace are also going to be transferred seamlessly to that newly created codespace as well. And alternatively, if you don't want to be using GitHub codespaces for any reason, you can also do a one-click clone to your local machine. And so that's one limitation that I want to call out right now. At the same point in time, I want to tell you that the future is so close to being here, of being able to, for example, run Python in your browser. So in this repository, I'm in the Microsoft VS Code Python Web WASM repository. And here I have a Python file open. I do also have this experimental extension that allows me to run Python directly inside my browser. This is experimental and it is subject to change, but it is also available for you to try out right now. So I'm going to go into my app.py file, and then I'm going to click on this Run button in the top right corner of my editor and say Run Python file in WASM. And you'll see here that it executed hello world and then exited out. So we've been hard at work bringing more of the power of WebAssembly to VS Code for the web. And until then, as I mentioned earlier, there is always a one-click experience for you to upgrade from just the bare lightweight serverless VS Code and GitHub environment that I'm showing you right now to a GitHub codespace where there is actually a virtual machine and there's a remote connection that you're connected to. And with that, I think that brings me to the end of my demos. So what we just saw was opening repositories with VS Code in any browser without cloning them locally, working in multiple branches, pull requests, editing website content, and so many more features besides. And next up, I just have a few links for you. So if you want to check out the VS Code repo literally right now, you can just click that link. It is that simple. In addition, we also have a couple of additional extensions that I called out, the Chrome extension and the companion extensions on desktop. And finally, here's the docs page for you if you want to try running Python directly in your browser. With that, I've come to the end of my talk. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I am at JoycerHL on GitHub and Twitter. If you have any feedback, questions, please send them to me. And thank you so much. Happy coding.
Thank you, Joyce. What an amazing final session to end on. So fun to see all of those developments. We do have time for a few questions. So Ollie in the chat asks, can we use GPG signatures to sign commits on these repositories? What about making git config and dot files available on them?
Yeah, so all commits that are created with GitHub and VS Code for the web are signed by default. So there's absolutely no setup that's required for that, because just like how when you make a commit on github.com that's already signed, it's the exact same experience. So you don't have to worry about setting that up. As far as git config, we recently added support for git attributes and git ignore files, and we could certainly look into support for git configs as well. So if you wouldn't mind filing a feature request for that, we could certainly take a look.
Thank you. And also giving some action items on where people can go if they want to have support added for VS Code. I absolutely appreciate that. I mean, it's a through line. We're community focused and we love to get the feedback and adapt to that. Another question, if github.dev runs everywhere, can I use it to edit my repositories on my TV or Apple Watch?
Ooh.
Absolutely. We have also seen people editing repositories on their Tesla. So literally anywhere that you have a browser, you can work on GitHub repositories and pull requests with VS Code.
That is amazing. Probably unsafe to do it on the Tesla, but that's okay.
Not while you're driving.
Yeah. All right, and another question we have, your github.dev showed features like copying GitHub deeplinks from the editor line numbers and upgrading to a GitHub codespace. Does that also work for a desktop Git repository?
Yes, absolutely. So if you're in a desktop Git repository that is backed up to GitHub, you can also go into your editor and copy deep links. And that's actually a feature that I forgot to show earlier, so apologies for that. But you can certainly try it out in your editor right now. And again, go into that remote indicator in the bottom left corner of the editor and search for continue working in codespace. And you'll be able to upgrade seamlessly from a desktop Git clone just like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joyce, for being here today. Thank you for the amazing cookies as well and for your dedication to VS Code.
What a way to have the last presentation.
I know.